30 million people watched him every week. They adored him, trusted him, invited him into their living rooms every night. He was a convicted murderer. And that was just number one on this list. British television spent decades manufacturing some of the most beloved faces in the world. But a handful of those faces were hiding secrets so dark, so calculated, so completely at odds with the warmth they sold, that when the truth finally came out, it didn't just destroy careers. It shattered everything the public thought they knew about trust itself. These are 12 British TV personalities who lived extraordinary double lives, and hid them in plain sight. Let's start with the man who played Britain's most famous fictional villain, because the writers never knew they'd hired someone who understood that role from the inside out. In the mid-1980s, Leslie Grantham was the name in British television. As Dirty Den on EastEnders, he was the charismatic rogue the entire nation couldn't get enough of. At the absolute peak of his fame, over 30 million viewers tuned in weekly. He was untouchable. But here's what those 30 million viewers didn't know. Long before he ever stepped onto a film set, Grantham was a British soldier stationed in West Germany. In 1966, a botched robbery attempt led to a fatal confrontation, and a local taxi driver was dead. Grantham was convicted of murder. He served a full decade in prison. It was behind bars that he discovered acting. Think about that. The BBC built one of the biggest cultural phenomena in television history around a man playing a small-time crook, while quietly hoping his actual criminal record stayed buried in the archives. When the tabloids eventually found it, the PR machine pivoted fast. Redemption narrative. Reformed man. And remarkably, it worked. For a while. But his story reveals something deeply uncomfortable about how we consume celebrity. We will forgive almost anything, as long as the person on screen keeps entertaining us. The most complex character Leslie Grantham ever played wasn't Dirty Denver. It was the polished, reformed gentleman he became the moment the cameras stopped rolling. If Grantham was the villain hiding in plain sight, Frank Bough was the opposite, the man you'd never suspect in a million years. In the 1980s, Bough was the nation's favorite morning face. Anchoring flagship BBC programs like Grandstand and Breakfast Time, he was the living embodiment of safe, comforting, middle-class respectability. The knitwear. The gentle smile. The voice that guided millions into their day. But funding that wholesome image was a secret life that ran in the exact opposite direction. In 1988, tabloid reporters uncovered what colleagues had quietly whispered about for years. That Bough had been a regular participant in underground gatherings fueled by Class A substances and the services of sex workers. Now here's what made his scandal uniquely devastating, compared to, say, a rock star getting caught doing the same thing. Nobody cared when a rock star did it. It was practically part of the job description. But Frank Bough? He was the man people watched while drinking their morning tea. The BBC couldn't survive that cognitive dissonance. They dropped him almost overnight. What's truly fascinating isn't just the double life, it's the nerve required to maintain it. For years, Bough sat in front of millions and delivered a masterclass in composed, polite broadcasting. Fully knowing that his private habits were a ticking bomb. Fully aware that the moment it detonated, everything was gone. He showed a generation of viewers something they really didn't want to know. The most reassuring faces on television are sometimes wearing the thickest masks. There's a very specific kind of genius in convincing the world you're harmless. Tommy Cooper built an entire career on it. Standing 6 feet 4 inches, wearing his famous red fez, he performed magic tricks that deliberately failed, bumbling, confused, lovable. A giant who somehow posed zero threat. The joke was always on him, and audiences adored him for it. The harmlessness was a lie. The moment Cooper stepped out of the spotlight, the lovable buffoon disappeared. What replaced him was a highly volatile, deeply destructive personality, driven by a severe reliance on alcohol. But the sharpest contradiction to his stage persona was found in his long-term secret relationship with his assistant, Mary Fieldhouse. Far from the gentle giant the public cheered for, Cooper subjected her to years of severe physical intimidation and emotional control. The man who generated joy on stage generated something entirely different behind closed doors, a constant, exhausting sense of fear. His legacy forces us to confront an assumption we make automatically about entertainers, that someone who spends their life making people laugh must possess genuine warmth. Cooper weaponized his size to command laughter in the theater, and weaponized that exact same size to enforce dominance in private. The man who made millions feel completely at ease ensured that the person standing closest to him rarely felt safe at all. Saturday night. 1980s. Millions of British families. One name dominated, Cilla Black. Hosting Blind Date and surprise surprise, she was the relatable working-class girl from Liverpool, everyone's cheeky, warm, down-to-earth mate. The queen of light entertainment. A persona so perfectly crafted that it made her one of the most successful broadcasters in UK history. Ask the people who actually worked with her, though, and a completely different picture emerges. The moment the director called cut, accounts suggest that warm persona frequently evaporated. Behind the scenes, Black was notoriously uncompromising, fiercely demanding, and often dismissive of crew members she deemed beneath her status. Junior staff were treated with open disdain. For years, she reportedly topped informal polls among airline staff as one of the most difficult celebrity passengers in the industry. Now, demanding behavior in show business isn't exactly rare. But what makes Black's case fascinating is the scale of the gap between product and reality. She didn't play a fictional character. She monetized a carefully sanitized version of herself, a woman millions believed would happily invite them in for a cup of tea, completely unaware she likely wouldn't make eye contact with the person pouring it. Her career proves something brutal about the entertainment industry. On-screen warmth is a highly valuable currency. And you don't necessarily need to possess it to make millions selling it. In 2005, the British establishment gave Rolf Harris one of the highest honors it could offer an entertainer, an invitation to Buckingham Palace to paint an official portrait of the Queen. By that point, he was more than a broadcaster. He was the nation's quirky artistic grandfather. The wobble board. The messy paintbrushes. The tearful kindness on Animal Hospital. His personal brand was practically synonymous with innocence. That innocence was the most perfectly constructed piece of camouflage in British entertainment history. Decades after his TV peak, the public watched in disbelief as the man who painted the monarch was convicted and imprisoned for a string of historical offenses against vulnerable individuals spanning multiple decades. The mechanics of his deception were chillingly simple. Harris didn't lurk in shadows. He used the direct access that fame itself provided, public appearances, television studios, social circles, to reach his targets. He hid in plain sight, protected by a force more powerful than any security system, the public's absolute refusal to suspect a beloved family entertainer. Society told itself, if a man spends his week crying over sick animals on television and his weekends making children laugh, his character must be sound. The fallout was total. Knighthood stripped. BAFTA fellowship revoked. His body of work quietly erased. His story leaves us with an unbearable truth: a disarming persona is not always a reflection of a good heart. Sometimes it's a calculated performance, specifically designed to ensure the audience never looks closely enough to see what's hiding right in front of them. In 1960s Britain, there was one laugh you could always pick out of a crowd. High-pitched, infectious, unmistakable. Barbara Windsor. Through the Carry On films and later as Peggy Mitchell on EastEnders, she was the cheeky Cockney sweetheart, a comic actress so universally loved she became a national institution. What her fans didn't see was her social calendar. Away from the cameras, Windsor moved freely through the upper echelons of London's criminal underworld. Her circle included the Cray twins, the most notorious organized crime bosses in British history. She had romantic involvement with figures deeply embedded in that world, including Charlie Cray, and navigated spaces built on territorial control and intimidation as comfortably as she navigated a film set. What makes her story so compelling is how seamlessly those two realities coexisted. In the 1960s, the line between celebrity and organized crime occasionally blurred in London, but very few people straddled it as successfully as Windsor. Her public image as a naive, cheerful sweetheart worked as powerful insulation. The public simply couldn't reconcile the unthreatening woman on their screens with the gritty reality of East End mob culture. Windsor maintained her status as a beloved icon until her passing, facing virtually no professional consequences for her underworld connections. Her career is a masterclass in compartmentalization, proof that a perfectly maintained harmless persona is sometimes the ultimate all-access pass. Every name on this list lived a double life. But one man used his public image not just to hide what he was, but to actively fund it. Jimmy Savile held, both literally and figuratively, the keys to the most trusted institutions in the United Kingdom. His charity marathons raised millions. His Jim'll Fix It program made children's dreams come true on national television. The Queen gave him a knighthood. He had audiences with the Pope. He was treated, without question, as a living saint. But Savile did not use philanthropy to give back. He used it as an access pass. The hospitals, the care homes, the television studios. They were not acts of generosity. They were, investigators would later confirm, his preferred locations to target hundreds of vulnerable individuals over the span of 5 decades. The psychological manipulation he deployed wasn't just against his victims. It was against an entire country. He understood something fundamental about human cognition. The mind simply cannot process that a man handing a large check to a children's ward is simultaneously committing unthinkable acts. He deliberately leaned into his own eccentricity, using it to cross lines that would have flagged anyone else instantly. When rare voices tried to raise concerns, the sheer weight of his public standing crushed them. He died in 2011, a celebrated national figure, receiving a state-like funeral, and never faced a single charge. When the full scale of his crimes was exposed posthumously, it didn't just destroy his legacy. It forced a devastating reckoning with every institution that chose to look the other way. Savile is the definitive, most chilling proof of everything this video argues. Awards, philanthropy, and public adoration are not evidence of character. Sometimes they are simply the bricks used to build the perfect hiding place. Huey Green ended every episode of Opportunity Knocks the same way, looking directly into camera and saying, "I mean that most sincerely, folks." For years, the public believed him. He was more than a talent show host. He was the moral compass of primetime Britain, delivering earnest monologues about family values, loyalty, and basic decency. Behind the scenes, he was executing a multi-decade deception that would devastate 2 families. Green had conducted a prolonged secret affair with the wife of fellow presenter Jess Yates, his supposed friend and colleague. That relationship produced a daughter. A daughter Jess Yates would raise as his own, never knowing the truth. That daughter grew up to be Paula Yates, one of Britain's most famous television personalities. For decades, Green sat back and watched his colleague raise his child, said nothing, and continued publicly preaching about honesty and integrity. The truth only emerged after his death in 1997, leaving Paula to process the revelation that her entire childhood had been built on a lie constructed by the man who lectured a nation on sincerity. His story leaves behind one lasting, uncomfortable observation. The people who shout the loudest about moral integrity in public are frequently trying to drown out the sound of their own private transgressions. Politics attracts performers. But few political performances in British history were as carefully constructed, or as spectacularly destructive when they collapsed, as Jeremy Thorpe's. As leader of the Liberal Party in the late 1960s and 70s, Thorpe was razor-sharp, immaculately tailored, aristocratically charming. The golden boy of progressive British politics. A man who looked every inch a future Prime Minister. Maintaining that trajectory required the aggressive suppression of what would have been, in that era, a career-ending secret, a relationship with a younger man named Norman Scott. When that relationship fractured and Scott began threatening exposure, Thorpe allegedly decided the situation required more than a PR strategy. In 1979, one of Britain's leading political figures stood in a criminal court charged with conspiracy to murder. Prosecutors alleged Thorpe had orchestrated a plot to hire a hitman to assassinate Scott. The operation was catastrophically bungled, ending on a quiet country road with only Scott's dog killed, but the investigation that followed led directly back to Westminster. Thorpe was ultimately acquitted, largely because the prosecution's witnesses were deemed unreliable. But the trial destroyed him completely. The contrast is stark. On the floor of Parliament, a statesman championing civil liberties and democratic ideals. In a courtroom, evidence pointing toward a man allegedly willing to commission a killing to protect his grip on power. It stripped the refined veneer off the political establishment, and showed the country that behind Parliament's polite traditions, the instinct for self-preservation can be completely ruthless. In the British celebrity ecosystem, there are those who stand in the spotlight, and there are those who control the switches. For decades, Max Clifford controlled everything. He wasn't an actor or a musician. He was the undisputed king of public relations, the man high-profile figures called when scandal threatened to destroy them. He had tabloid editors on speed dial. He decided what made front pages, and more critically, what was quietly buried forever. He was feared, respected, considered impenetrable. But the vast architecture of silence he built to protect his clients was also protecting something far darker and closer to home. Clifford leveraged his enormous power within the entertainment industry to systematically exploit young women and teenage girls. The currency of his trade, promises of stardom, threats of media destruction, was weaponized to guarantee his victims' silence. He operated on the assumption that his ability to destroy reputations made him permanently immune from accountability. For a long time, that assumption held. It expired in 2014. The master of spin found himself in a courtroom facing charges he could neither bury nor rebrand. He was convicted of multiple counts of indecent assault and sentenced to 8 years in prison, where he died before completing his term. His downfall is one of the most chilling ironies in the history of the industry. The man who built a fortune cleaning up other people's shameful secrets was secretly committing crimes far worse than anything he ever covered up. Physical presence shapes political identity. And nobody understood that better, or weaponized it more effectively, than Cyril Smith. Weighing nearly 30 stone, Smith was the undeniable jolly giant of the House of Commons, a booming voice, regular appearances on light entertainment shows, and a reputation for dressing as Santa Claus for local charities. Uncle Cyril. Champion of the working-class town of Rochdale. So beloved that the Crown eventually awarded him a knighthood. Behind closed doors, extensive police reports and public inquiries would later reveal, Smith was using his political access to systematically abuse vulnerable children in the care system over multiple decades. But what elevates this beyond a personal crime is what happened when people tried to stop it. It wasn't as though nobody knew. Credible warnings were raised as early as the 1960s, to law enforcement, to media figures, to political colleagues. And time after time, those investigations were quietly suppressed. The establishment chose to protect the reputation of a high-profile public asset over the individuals he targeted. Smith died in 2010, surrounded by grieving dignitaries at a grand civic funeral. He never spent a single hour in a police cell. His legacy shatters the comforting idea that truly dangerous individuals operate in the dark. Sometimes they operate in broad daylight, wearing a Santa costume, with a knighthood on the wall, and are protected by the very institutions built to stop them. 12 names. 12 meticulously constructed public images. 12 radically different private realities. There's a pattern running through every single one of these stories, and it's worth naming directly. We are extraordinarily reluctant to suspect the people who entertain us. The warmth, the laughter, the charity work, these aren't just feelings. They're a force field. A psychological barrier that prevents us from asking the questions we probably should. That's not a character flaw in the audience. It's a fundamental feature of how human trust operates. And it's precisely why it can be exploited. The uncomfortable takeaway from every name on this list isn't just that famous people can be bad people. It's that the machinery of fame itself, the awards, the adoration, the brand, can function as armor. The most dangerous individuals aren't always the ones lurking in shadows. Sometimes they're the ones we give the standing ovation to. If this video made you think, subscribe. There's more where this came from. And drop in the comments, which name on this list genuinely shocked you the most?